Of all the things to possibly be excited about with another Donald Trump presidency inbound, which I do have my concerns, don't get me wrong, one thing that I am most certainly excited to see is the appointment of one RFK Jr. as the head of the HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, an organization and institution that has more funding than the Department of Defense itself, with over $2 trillion in assets at its disposal. And what do we see that the HHS has done? Nothing good, because in the United States, we are the most unhealthy society in the entire world, being rocked by an obesity crisis that is absolutely devastating, that is now, as we have seen consistently, and as you have most certainly observed with your own eyes, overtaking children in mass, with roughly 1 in 2 children now being diabetic or pre-diabetic. And not only that, we see pushing now towards roughly 50% of those children having fatty liver disease. And for those who are unaware, fatty liver disease is something that was only discovered previously in late stage alcoholics. But now, with the absolute calamity of the metabolic health crisis that we see within the United States, well, it appears that now children are suffering from this ailment as well. And what does that mean? Well, that the HHS has done nothing more than prolong the standards of what so many of these different health organizations do, when they do nothing more but promote your children and yourself as being seen as a dollar sign in the eyes of many of these different lobbying organizations that are buying off the politicians that claim to care about you and serve you, the citizenry. But what we can understand is that with the actions of one RFK Jr. and what he has done recently with the amalgamation of his efforts to work with the Trump campaign to push for the Make America Healthy Again standards, to coalesce with the Make America Great Again movement, we see something that truly could be quite fascinating, that could shift the standards of American health and tilt us away from the damnation that we are most certainly snowballing our way towards. Now, let's go ahead and jump in and see what we have with an announcement from RFK Jr. on October 25th, and this truly did set the precedent for so many people. Here we see the FDA's war on public health is about to end. This includes its aggressive suppression of psychedelics, peptides, stem cells, raw milk, hyperbaric therapies, chelating compounds, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, vitamins, clean foods, sunshine, exercise, nutraceuticals, and anything else that advances human health and can't be patented by pharma. If you work for the FDA and you are part of this corrupt system, I have 2 messages for you. 1, preserve your records, and 2, pack your fucking bags. And it would seem that some of them took that quite literally, because as we see here from NBC News, FDA employees consider quitting if RFK Jr. joins Trump administration. Quite interesting that, huh? Yeah, I thought so as well. A man claims he wants to root out the corruption within your institution and organization, and you self-report by saying, I think I'm gonna have to leave. Well, thank you. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Here we can see an announcement from RFK Jr. Thank you, real Donald Trump, for your leadership and courage. I'm committed to advancing your vision to make America healthy again. We have a generational opportunity to bring together the greatest minds in science, medicine, industry, and government to put an end to the chronic disease epidemic. I look forward to working with more than 80,000 employees at the HHS to free the agencies from the smothering cloud of corporate capture so they can pursue their mission to make America once again the healthiest people on earth. Together, we will clean up corruption, stop the revolving door between industry and government, and return our health agencies to their rich tradition of gold standard evidence-based science. I will provide Americans with transparency and access to all of the data so they can make informed choices for themselves and their families. My commitment to the American people is to be an honest public servant. Let's go. And now here we see the FDA just 2 minutes after RFK Jr. takes the job. Unfathomably accurate. Everything they know destroyed around them. Their ability to profit off of children and use them as nothing more than a mechanism for exploitation, to see as a dollar sign. Destroyed, scattered to the wind, and blown into 1,000 fucking pieces, as it most certainly deserves to be. Now on to the man himself who made the appointment, one Donald John Trump. I am thrilled to announce Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the United States Secretary of Health and Human Services. For too long, Americans have been crushed by the industrial food complex and drug companies who have engaged in deception, misinformation, and disinformation when it comes to public health. The safety and health of all Americans is the most important role of any administration, and HHS will play a big role in helping ensure that everybody will be protected from harmful chemicals, pollutants, pesticides, pharmaceutical products, and food additives that have contributed to the overwhelming health crisis in this country. Mr. Kennedy will restore these agencies to their traditions of gold standard scientific research and beacons of transparency to the end of this chronic disease epidemic and to make America great and healthy again. Absolutely phenomenal. This is undoubtedly one of the greatest appointments that Donald Trump could have made. If there was anyone that understands how to root out corruption from institutions, it is most certainly RFK Jr., who has been fighting it for ages. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I give you your next head of the HHS.
This is what most Americans innocently put into their bodies these days, and most alarmingly, into the bodies of their children. And it's no coincidence that Americans die earlier than Canadians or Germans or Italians or Japanese or Koreans or Australians or most any other comparable country. And it wasn't always that way. Until the early 1990s, our life expectancy was the same or better than other developed countries. Then, suddenly, more and more Americans began suffering from chronic diseases, from obesity, cancer, diabetes, kidney disease, Alzheimer's, heart disease, and all kinds of autoimmune diseases. Our maternal mortality rate soared to the highest of any developed country on Earth. Same with infant mortality. Like the frog in the slowly boiling water, we didn't really notice as we got sicker and sicker. We've grown now to accept chronic disease conditions as normal. But now, in 2024, we're finally waking up to this cataclysm, and we're asking ourselves, how in the world did this happen? Well, a big part of it is our diet. Restaurants that serve contaminated food are fined or shut down. But when it's the government that approves the poisons in our food, a few people get very, very rich, and the toxins end up in every supermarket aisle. Let me show you what I mean. Doritos, Cheez-Its, Captain Crunch, gummy bears. Everyone knows that these are junk foods, so maybe you wouldn't be too surprised to see that the ingredients include a lot of poisons, including a harmful yellow dye called tartrazine, or yellow dye number 5. What you may not know is that this dye was originally made out of the sludge that's left over when you turn coal into coke for blast furnaces. It's called coal tar, and I've actually sued many big industries for legacy contamination of coal tar all around the country because it's so toxic and it's so harmful to the environment and human beings. A century ago, it was just an obnoxious industrial byproduct that everybody was trying to figure out ways to get rid of. One of the ways that they did that was by paving roads. But then a British chemist figured out that the coal tar could be used to derive fabric dye. And if fabric dye, why not food? Food manufacturers began using it to cover up the discoloration of low-quality foods that they wanted to pass off on unsuspecting customers. They didn't know back then that this yellow dye, tartrazine, causes tumors, asthma, developmental delays, neurological damage, ADD, ADHD, hormone disruption, gene damage, anxiety, depression, intestinal injuries. Well, we know it now. We've known this for decades. That's why tartrazine is heavily restricted in other countries. In some countries, foods with tartrazine have a warning label that it may cause ADHD in children. Today, it's made from petroleum, not coal tar. Either way, it's crazy to add this to your kids' favorite foods. It doesn't even change the flavor. This yellow dye isn't just in junk food. It's in the foods that we consider healthy. It's in everyday kid snacks like popcorn, mac and cheese, fruit snacks. It's in sports drinks like Gatorade and so-called vitamin water. It's even added to chicken broth, to corn, to pickles, to mustard, and to yogurt. And so, of course, our kids get sick. And we lovingly feed them chewable vitamins, which have, surprise, tartrazine. And so the cycle continues until the coughs and asthma kick in, at which point you go to pick up some cough syrup. And yeah, you guessed it, tartrazine. I've been picking on tartrazine today, but that's just one of at least 100 chemical poisons that our health agencies allow into our children's food. I can make a video just like this to talk about Red 40, BHA, BHD, potassium bromate, chemical after chemical, and on and on and on. If just one of them can cause all of these problems, imagine what they're doing in combination. That's never been studied. If we took all of these chemicals out, our nation would get healthier immediately. We'd have fewer sick days. We'd have better focus. We'd have less anxiety. Our kids would learn more easily. We'd lose weight. We'd have more energy. We'd have fewer tumors and longer lives. It's not all dark. Over the past 16 years, the government has banned 8 chemical additives that cause cancer, genetic damage, asthma, and many of the other health conditions as tartrazine does. And you know what's interesting? All 8 of those crucial steps forward in our kids' health were taken under President Trump. But the Democrats who claim to be all about healthcare have stood by watching other countries ban these poisons and make our kids sick, asthmatic, hyperactive, and depressed. They left them on every supermarket shelf in America. They even used your tax money to put them in your kids' school lunch. So their big food and their big ag donors probably gave them all that golden handshake and the big money hug, and their big pharma donors probably called them up and thanked them also, because now they're going to make billions selling Adderall, Prozac, and rescue inhalers. Enough is enough. President Trump and I are going to stop the mass poisoning of American children. Together, we're going to make America healthy again.
There's so much to say on this topic, but I'll just go ahead and leave it here with talking about the fact of Blue 5 and Red Dye number 40. These are both petroleum-derived products that they are putting in your children's food and they are consuming in mass. And the thing that drives me absolutely mad about this stuff specifically is that they claim, well, you see, it's safe in this allotted amount, in this specific dose that they're being given. Except it's in absolutely everything that has any form of artificial coloring because they're using these things to make sure that it's more palatable to the consumer. And in doing so, well, your children are consuming this stuff in mass far past the rate of consumption that is allotted by these companies, claiming that it is a safe amount to be consistently consumed because they are eating them in multiple different products and having far more than just one serving when they eat or drink whatever it is that they are consuming. It is very apparent that this is a major issue, and all you have to do is look at the obesity rate and the metabolic health crisis that has come from the fact of consuming all of these different poisons for so long. Well, let's now jump in here from the New York Times and see what they have for us. What we see is what RFK Jr. gets right and wrong about nutrition. We fact-checked 5 of his most repeated claims, and upon going through this, I can tell you that they actually don't really focus on 5 of his most repeated claims. They wanted to make sure that they could cherry pick some of what he was saying because they have to make sure that they're doing what they can, because these people that claim to care so much about your nutritional health, well, they're advocating for the standards that have led us to the point where we are now suffering in the way that we are in the current day. Moving on now into the article we see. As part of a promise to address the high rates of chronic disease in the United States, RFK Jr., who was recently tapped by President-elect Donald J. Trump to lead the Department of Health and Human Services, has said he would fix our broken food system. In interviews and on social media, Mr. Kennedy has made a number of claims about the country's food supply and eating habits. We fact-checked 5 of his most repeated refrains. Here we see ultra-processed foods as the topic, his claim being that these foods are driving the obesity epidemic and they should be removed from school lunches. I feel like there's a reasonable argument there, considering we are subsidizing the childhood obesity epidemic itself at that rate. Here we see what the research suggests is that many public health and nutrition experts agree that ultra-processed foods, which make up an estimated 73% of the U.S. food supply, let that sink in, are probably contributing to the obesity crisis in the United States, and it would be beneficial to cut back on them. Probably contributing. That, let's just go ahead and leave that there. But the category is wide-ranging, and it's not clear if all ultra-processed foods are harmful, experts say. There may be downsides to avoiding some ultra-processed foods like flavored yogurts and whole wheat breads and cereals, they add, because they can provide valuable nutrients. Except that's not what RFK is talking about. He's not telling you to avoid things like dairy. He's telling you to avoid the chemicals, compounds, and oils that are being put in all of these different food products. And specifically, he's trying to hold these companies accountable for putting these different things into the food supply itself because it's cheaper for them. And on top of that, we know that pharma absolutely loves it because it makes you nothing more than something that they can profit off of down the line. Here we see Lindsay Smith-Tail, an associate professor of nutrition at the UNC Gillings School of Global Public Health, said that it would be transformative to remove ultra-processed foods from school lunches, but she added schools would need more resources to prepare meals from scratch. And that's absolutely true. But here's the deal. We're not even specifically talking about the fact of what's going on with removing all ultra-processed foods. What he's specifically stating is that we should be removing the chemicals and additives and dyes that are artificial that we know have negative ramifications for human health, which you would assume is something that the people who were heading the HHS previously would certainly care about, considering there are over $2 trillion of resources in that money pot. But no, they're not doing anything to tackle it. In fact, as we've so consistently seen, we've only gotten worse here in the United States. And all you have to do is listen to Europeans talk about the States to understand exactly that, how it is that we are perceived by the world as gluttons. And there is a very good reason for that, and it's because we have been completely rocked by an obesity crisis. Here we see Food dyes. His claim: food dyes cause cancer and ADHD in children. What the research suggests. While some small clinical trials have suggested that certain synthetic food dyes may increase hyperactivity in children, there's no solid evidence that they directly cause ADHD. However, many experts agree that because food dyes aren't nutritionally necessary, it wouldn't hurt to avoid them. Interesting that. Here we see in 1990, the Food and Drug Administration banned the use of red dye number 3 in cosmetics after research in animals linked it to cancer. At the time, the agency said it would also work to extend the ban to foods and drugs, but it has not yet done so. The FDA is currently reviewing the safety of red dye number 3. Ah, yes, still reviewing that in this current day, even though we understand what it does to animals in the 90s. But of course, as you know, because it's profitable, the politicians will consistently advocate for the standards that are thrust upon you that the people who are lobbying them are advocating for. Now back to the topic of dyes in your children's food that are derived from petroleum products that would be otherwise considered poisonous and toxic to consume. Here we see Mr. Kennedy has singled out Fruit Loops as an example of a product with too many ingredients. In an interview with MSNBC on November 6th, he questioned the overall ingredient count. Why do we have Fruit Loops in this country that have 18 or 19 ingredients, and you go to Canada and it only has 2 or 3, Mr. Kennedy asked. He was wrong on the ingredient count, though. They are roughly the same, but the Canadian version does have natural colorings made from blueberries and carrots, while the US product contains red dye 40, yellow 5, and blue 1, as well as butylated hydroxytoluene, or BHT, a lab-made chemical that is used for freshness according to the ingredient label. That is just remarkable when you consider the nature of what Mr. Kennedy was actually saying in that conversation that he was having on MSNBC. He was specifically talking about the additives and ingredients that are added into things like these cereals akin to Fruit Loops, claiming when you see these things in Canada, they only have roughly 2 or 3, whereas in the United States, we average around 18 to 19, considering all of the different things that go into so many of the different products that we create. But of course, the media isn't going to represent that fairly. No, no. Why would they do that? Now let's go ahead, jump back in, and see what else this has for us. Here we now see the topic of raw milk. Mr. Kennedy's claims that he said he only drinks raw milk, suggesting that the restrictions on small farms from selling raw milk should be re-examined. And I absolutely agree with this in its entirety. The fact is, like we've talked about on this channel, on many of the different videos I've made talking about health, nutrition, and the metabolic health crisis, I've addressed the fact of raw dairy. And if you are someone who is lactose intolerant, meaning you cannot properly consume something that has lactose in it, then by all means, the reason you cannot do this is because your body cannot produce a sufficient amount of lactase. And what happens is when you pasteurize dairy, aka milk, what happens is, well, you end up removing the lactase itself from the product that you are selling. In the process, you end up making it so people who are lactose intolerant cannot properly consume, process, and digest that dairy. Thus, it leads to them bloating and being gassy. This is exactly why you have people who are lactose intolerant. So what we can understand about that would be what? That if you're someone who is one of these people, then if you would like to actually consume dairy products and not have this be an issue, then what you would want to try would be something akin to raw dairy, whether that be raw milk, raw cheese, raw kefir, it's up to you. If you're someone who's had an experience with this and gone through this, please let me know in the comment section down below. Here we see what the research suggests. Food and safety experts say that because raw or unpasteurized milk can contain harmful pathogens like E. coli, listeria, and salmonella, drinking it can cause serious foodborne illnesses. And much like what we see with every single other product that gets sold on store shelves, when you see someone who is sick, what happens? There is a major recall, as we just saw with Boar's Head cheese and meats, which is by all means a product that is pasteurized dairy. So as we know, there are still standards that we see companies that are selling raw dairy products still have to operate under, but of course, this is nothing more than fear-mongering. In the end, what we would understand is something quite fascinating that actually ended up happening in relation to the 2024 election, specifically in correlation with raw dairy, and this is quite a fascinating turn of events because of the recent seizure of things like Amos Miller's products in Pennsylvania and the consistent encroachment of the federal government upon the Amish community. What we saw was over 100,000 Amish people in Pennsylvania turned out to vote and cast a ballot for one Donald John Trump. and in the process got him elected as the president of the United States. Because as they were saying this time around, so goes Pennsylvania, so goes the nation. Thus, that means that the federal government's persecution of raw dairy and the Amish is effectively what got Donald Trump placed into office as the next president of the United States. Absolutely remarkable. Moving on now, here we see the topic of sugar. Mr. Kennedy's claim is that consuming too many added sugars, especially from high fructose corn syrup, contributes to childhood obesity and cardiovascular disease. And of course, this is well known. Here you see the research suggests that this is correct. There is solid evidence that consuming too many added sugars, including from high fructose corn syrup, keep that one in mind, can drive up the risk of a number of health problems, including cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, as we've already mentioned, obesity, and cavities. Americans consume on average about twice the American Heart Association's recommended limited amount for added sugars, with sweetened beverages like sugary sodas being at the top source. So what we can understand is that this consistent consumption of things like high fructose corn syrup is assisting in the metabolic health crisis within the United States and the obesity epidemic, but it's doing so in a fascinating way that many people are not even aware of. How is it that high fructose corn syrup operates? Well, I'm glad you asked. What it does is hijack your body's hunger signaling system by effectively making your ghrelin skyrocket. And how it does this is by effectively teaching your body that it is preparing for winter. And why might that be the case? Because fructose is the thing that your body processes that tells you that it's time to pack on weight, which ends up sending your ghrelin spiking through the roof. And because you have an extremely unnatural amount compounded together in something like high fructose corn syrup, these scientists, addiction scientists, mind you, are very well aware of how it is that they would need to hijack your body's signaling systems so that they could make sure that you want to endlessly consume whatever products it is that they're putting on the shelves in front of you. And by filling these products with things like high fructose corn syrup, what you then want to do when eating these products is not eat simply one serving or two, but the entire batch itself, which is exactly why we see so many people completely unable to achieve things like satiety, saying that they're never full, and it's because of the foods that they're eating are consistently tricking them and their bodies as well as their minds into thinking that they aren't full, solely for the fact that these companies that are producing these products have used the same scientists that made tobacco addictive to make their food addictive as well. Just something for many to consider. And to finish it off, here we see seed oils, something we've talked about numerous times on this channel. There are plenty of different videos for you to go find on this topic. Here we see his claim: Americans are being unknowingly poisoned by seed oils like canola, soybean, and sunflower oils, and it would be healthier for restaurants to fry food in beef tallow instead. And this is a complete surface level analysis, removing all understanding of what it is that RFK Jr. is actually saying, not tackling any of the minutia of what's actually going on within the conversation around things like seed oils and why it's important to focus on it. The fact is that they are incredibly high in linoleic acid, they are rich in poly-6 omega unsaturated fats, thus them being incredibly unhealthy for you because of the type of fats that your body is being overloaded with because of the rate of which how much we are consuming them. That is the issue with them. There's so much more to say on this, but I've already talked about it in excruciating detail, as have so many others, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave it there. I realistically don't have too much time left to record this video because I need to head to the gym before I head out for the rest of the day, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for watching. If you got this far, thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. Stay lovely, stay great, and most importantly, my friends, tell someone you love them. Peace out.